The flight attendant's voice cut across the gate like a blade. "You, stand up," she said, and her head turned as if magnetized. Naomi felt phones lift, people hunting for a frame that would decide her fate. A stranger's screen flashed her passport photo with the caption, "Possible watcher. Post it." 2 minutes later, a single call would ground the plane. 2 seconds later, nothing felt private. This was not just a delay. It was the moment the world tried to write her story for her. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. The airport smelled like lukewarm coffee and tired leather. Fluorescent lights hummed above, casting everything in a flat, businesslike glow. Outside the long windows, the runway lay like a gray promise. Planes parked like sleeping beasts, their metal skins catching little slices of morning. Naomi sat with her back pressed to the cool plastic of a terminal chair, her backpack at her feet, and a boarding pass clenched in one hand. Her other hand smoothed a small square of paper she had folded until the creases were soft, a note from her mother that read, "Be brave. Come home a little richer for your dreams." Naomi was 17, and she carried herself with a quiet that wasn't shyness so much as care. She watched people move, family goodbyes, business people on phones, children with sticky fingers, and learned small things about them by the rhythm of their steps. Today she had a rhythm all her own. Slow in the mornings, then faster when she thought about what waited at the other end of the flight. This trip was a hinge in her life, a scholarship interview that could mean a different kind of future, money for college, room to breathe. Her skin tightened every time she imagined telling her mother the news. The note was heavy in her pocket, not because of its ink, but because of the years it carried. Years of jobs, small victories, missed chances, and the steady insistence that Naomi try. There was a map in Naomi's head of how people expected her to behave at an airport like this. Quiet, polite, invisible enough to fly under the radar. That map had been drawn for her by eye rolls and murmured warnings years ago. She knew, without being told, the small ways to make the world feel safer. A neutral face, steady hands, no sudden moves in crowded aisles. Those rules had kept her out of trouble more times than she wanted to count. Still, rules and maps were not the same thing as maps of a heart. Underneath the practice calm was a small drumbeat of excitement and fear. She wanted badly to be seen for more than the shape people expected her to be. The narrator in the room, kind, tender, leaning close to the small details, noticed how Naomi kept tucking loose hairs behind her ear when a woman with a suitcase brushed past. That tiny motion told a story of habit and nerves. The narrator heard the muffled laugh she tried to hide when a child 2 rows overshowed, a crumpled paper airplane. The laughter was quick, like a bird's call, and then gone. Naomi's mouth held the kind of quiet resolve that made people not notice her at first, and that invisibility suited her most days. Today, though, invisibility felt like a thin coat in winter, necessary but not enough. From a different distance, the scene looked cleaner, more mechanical. Boarding would begin in 40 minutes. Gate staff adjusted signs, making the list of names and numbers into a procession. Flights arrived and left the airport, a clockwork of departures and reunions. Naomi's boarding pass declared her seat, 16A. She had memorized every detail of the trip, the way some people memorize prayers, times, transfer points, the name of the bus from the airport to the scholarship office. Logistics gave her comfort. It was comforting because it allowed her to hold the uncertain parts of life at arm's length and look at them like a problem to solve. People passed her with the impatient certainty of people who had somewhere else to be. A man in a navy suit adjusted his cufflinks. A teenager with blue hair swung his legs and scrolled through a phone. Naomi watched them, not because she didn't belong, but because watching was safer than speaking. She had a way of collecting small facts about strangers and storing them like stones. Later, when she needed courage, she'd pull one out and press it against her palm like a talisman. There was a tremor in the terminal's hum, the small crack in ordinary life when something is about to shift. Naomi noticed it first as a change in the way the light moved across the floor, a plane taxiing, engines rising to a ready whisper. And then, in the way a woman at the kiosk sniffed and straightened, as if remembering a sudden duty, little things rearranged themselves around that tremor. Naomi felt the air shift against her skin, a prickle of alertness that had nothing to do with the interview and everything to do with the gathering of other people's expectations. Her phone vibrated, and she let it buzz against her thigh without looking. A text from her mother, "Call me when you land." A small, steady instruction. Naomi smiled and typed back a quick thumbs-up emoji, though she refused to let herself breathe fully until she was on the ground at the other end. She folded her hands around the folded note and breathed in, tasting the faint bitterness of airport coffee in the air. Somewhere in the terminal of flight, attendant laughed too loudly, the sound cutting cleanly through the low chatter. Naomi watched that woman, mid-30s, hair put up in a precise knot, a uniform fitted the way armor fits those who carry invisible commands. The attendant looked like a person trained to be seen and heard, to make the rules stick. Naomi understood, with the clarity of a practiced observer, that the attendant's voice could split a room open or close it shut. For Naomi, who had learned how to shrink herself to survive, a loud voice was always a test. A stranger sat down beside Naomi, a man with tired eyes and a duffel bag, and asked without looking up if she was headed to New York. Naomi nodded. He smiled like someone who had once been young and still remembered what it felt like, and for a moment the airport seemed less like a grid and more like a promise. She pictured herself stepping off the plane with a letter in hand that said yes. She pictured her mother reading that letter at the kitchen table, the light from the single bulb catching on the steam from a pot. The image steadied her. This was the hinge of things, small, ordinary moments stacked until they tipped. Naomi folded the note again, slid it back into her pocket, and let the airport sound roll over her. She did not know, not yet, that in 2 minutes a voice would rise and tilt the air into something sharp. She did not yet know that a single call would make the plane stop, or that a stranger's decision would force her into a bright, cruel clarity she had been avoiding. For now she held to the quiet, to the map she had drawn in her head, and to the stubborn, secret fire that said she belonged at the other end. The moment came like a crack in glass, sudden, clear, and impossible to ignore. Naomi was folding her boarding pass back into her wallet when a voice cut through the terminal like a knife. It belonged to Claire, the flight attendant Naomi had noticed earlier, the one whose laugh had been too loud and whose uniform looked like a uniform of command. Claire's voice had the practiced sharpness of someone used to directing others. "You," she said, pointing with a finger that made the space between them colder. "Stand up. Now." Naomi looked up as if waking. For a second, everything blurred. The hum of the lights, the coffee machine's distant sigh, the slow conveyor of luggage. People turned. The man with tired eyes froze mid-sip of coffee. A child dropped a toy and watched with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Naomi felt the world compress into that one word "you" and then expand with 1,000 small looks. Her passport felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it had any right to be. From the intimate narrator's side, the one that leans close and feels for bruises not yet seen, Naomi's pulse was a staccato drum. She had learned, in a life that required constant reading of the air, how to become small and quiet and invisible. But the spotlight warred with habit. Her hands curled around the wallet, the note from her mother folded inside it like a fragile promise. She wanted to answer with calm, to show her ticket and smile in a way that made the moment pass, but Claire's gaze held the kind of readiness that did not accept small comforts. From a distance, the scene was almost mechanical, an airline professional enforcing rules, a passenger asked to comply. Yet the words Claire used carried something else, a tone threaded with accusation. You were loitering by the gate. You were watching people. Her mouth was a line. Her eyes scanned Naomi like someone checking a list and finding an unexpected name. Around them, the terminal's soft murmur tightened into pinched silence. Naomi's ears filled with the sound of her own breath. She said, "I," and the word fell away as if swallowed by the watchful air. Someone coughed. The man with the duffel bag stood and stepped closer, but did not touch Naomi. His smile had vanished, and a new set of muscles had set into his face. For a breath, Naomi saw him as a possible shield. The narrator who keeps watch notices his hands, calluses at the base of his fingers, a watch a little scuffed, small things that suggest long days and choices made under pressure. Naomi thought he might say something kind. Instead, he cleared his throat and asked, politely but with an odd distance, "Is everything okay here?" That question landed like a judge's gavel. Claire answered before Naomi could. "No, it's not. This girl was watching passengers too closely. We have rules about that. Please stand up and come with me while we sort out." There was a cadence to her speech that made Naomi feel like an exhibit. People's heads turned in a soft, synchronous motion. Phones were already lifting as if they were moths to a sudden light. Something in the air smelled of lemon cleaner and alarm. Naomi could feel the weight of the small note in her pocket, like a coin she could not spend. The compassionate side of the narrator wanted to explain. Naomi was nervous, that's all. She was imagining scenes in her head for her interview, that's all. The impartial I recorded for later, a young black teen drawn into a situation where the balance of power was not even. Those two voices together made a rhythm, an intimate plea, and a stark ledger, and Naomi heard both. She stood because her hands would not let her do otherwise. The terminal seemed suddenly much larger, the people around it forming a ring with Naomi at the center. Claire guided Naomi toward a little alcove, her posture professional, her touch light, but firm. Naomi's voice came out thin. "I'm just going to New York. I have my ticket." She showed the boarding pass as proof, smoothing the paper as if the creases might translate into honesty. Claire's face did not change. She took the pass, glanced at it, then at Naomi, and then at the direction of the gate agent, as if confirming a story she had already written. "You'll have to wait with me, sweetheart, while I verify a few things." The word sweetheart landed with soft cruelty. Naomi felt the heat rush up her neck. Behind Claire, a woman in a business suit, eyes sharp like clipped scissors, leaned forward and whispered something into her phone. The narrator in the room noticed the motion, the woman's fingers tapping, the way her lips formed the words with deliberate care. It was a tiny action, almost too small to mean anything, except that small things have a way of becoming proof later. Naomi felt in a sudden hollowed way, like a window that had been opened onto cold air. The man who had smiled before did not intercede. He checked his phone instead. There was the scent of betrayal in such small withdrawals, people who saw something and chose to record rather than to help. Naomi had learned early that kindness costs something in this world, and sometimes people choose their little conveniences over another person's dignity. The narrator who sympathized wanted to stand up and say that Naomi was a girl with a scholarship interview and a note from her mother and a heart full of careful plans. The impartial voice could only list what was happening. An accusation, a small containment, witness-like behaviors that could harden into testimony. Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced down and then looked up again, her face like a mask with the slightest crack. "Security's been informed," she said quietly, more to herself than to Naomi. Naomi's knees felt weak. The world had tilted in one small, sharp motion. She did not yet understand why Claire's tone held something like certainty, or why the woman in the suit had started typing so fast with her thumb. Someone in the ring let out a sound that might have been sympathy or might have been expectation. Naomi pressed her palms together until her knuckles whitened. In her pocket, the folded note from her mother warmed with the heat of her hand. She thought of the interview, of promises of the long bus rides, and of the small, secret idea that she could be something else. The moment she had imagined, stepping off the plane with a different future, was suddenly a fragile thing, shadowed by a question. Who had decided she was someone to be stopped? 2 minutes stretched thin and fast. Naomi heard the low hum of someone making a call, a syllable of a number being tapped out, and in that moment she realized the terminal had already chosen a story for her. She was no longer just Naomi with her folded note. She was a spectacle, a piece of evidence, a thing other people's choices would turn into meaning. The inciting crack had come. The plane of her life had shifted, and nothing would be quite the same. Naomi found herself sitting on a narrow bench in a dim alcove by gate 16, the hum of the terminal now a shouted roar in her ears. Across from her, Claire stood with an upright posture that said she had won something and was still waiting for applause. Claire's uniform fit like a suit of rules, belt snug, scarf tied just so, and yet there was a tremor in her fingers that didn't match the rest of her polish. The sympathetic narrator noticed the quick swallow Claire made when she thought no one looked. The impartial observer logged it as a sign that she was less steady than she wanted to appear. "Can you tell me again why you were watching people?" Claire asked, voice measured, as if she were reading from a script she had practiced. Her tone tried for authority and landed somewhere near rehearsal. Naomi breathed, held the little square note in her palm like a warm coin. "I wasn't watching anyone the way you mean," Naomi said. Her voice was soft but steady. "I was nervous. I was imagining the interview. I was folding paper airplanes in my head. That's all." "You were watching," Claire said. Claire's eyes flicked to the gate, to the faces around them, then back to Naomi. "That's what passengers said." Passengers. The word sounded like jury. Naomi's stomach tightened. She thought of her mother's note and the long bus rides. She felt the small, private life inside her prickling like a bloom under frost. David, the man with the duffel bag, hovered nearby, hands in his pockets. He had that weathered look of someone who knew hard days and hard choices. He stepped a half pace closer and offered, "She's young. Maybe she's just nervous." His voice had a softness that could have been shelter. Claire let out a breath that might have been relief or irritation. "We can't take chances," she said. "Security has to clear anything suspicious." Mark from security arrived with a badge that flashed flat light and a notepad that felt like a judge's book. He introduced himself with a professional nod and a slow, careful smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Name?" he asked. "Naomi Carter," she said. The name felt like a small island she clutched to. 17. "I have a scholarship interview." She tried to make the last bit sound like evidence. Mark glanced at the boarding pass, the passport photo, the folded note pushed like proof. "You're 16, eh?" he asked. Naomi nodded. He wrote without comment. The narrator who felt close wanted to tell Mark about the note, the bus rides, the kitchen table at home. The impartial voice only recorded, "A young black girl, documents in order, being vetted in public." Evelyn, the woman in the business suit, had drifted back to where she could watch. She had a phone in her hand and the type of face that thrived in small judgments. She leaned in with the curiosity of a magistrate. "It's better we're cautious," she said, eyes sliding over Naomi like a measuring tape. "You never know." The words were thinly veiled permission for the crowd to nod in agreement. A few people shifted, the ring tightening. Naomi felt their attention like heat. Inside Naomi, memories rose, her mother smoothing her hair, whispering that people will see what they want unless you make them see you differently. She wanted to be brave now, in the way her mother meant, steady and true. "If I did something wrong, I'd say so," she said. "But I didn't. I'm just going to New York for an interview." Claire's jaw worked. The narrator who leaned in could sense the two sides of her, one that wanted to be right for safety, and one that wanted to be seen as right for reputation. "We've had reports of people watching passengers," Claire said. "It's my job to check." Her hands steadied when she said the line. She almost sounded like someone reciting a prayer. David shifted his bag. "You okay, Naomi?" he asked. His question had the edge of someone who liked to help, but also liked to be seen helping. Naomi looked at him. There was warmth in his face, but also a careful wire. He was wary of stepping too far into trouble. Mark asked to see her ID again. He asked where she was staying in New York, the name of the program she was interviewing for, the time of the appointment. The questions were small and meant to be routine, but each one felt like a sieve through which Naomi had to prove her right to exist in that space. The impartial narrator noted how tiny details, an extra question, a slow look, become an architecture of suspicion. Claire's phone buzzed, and she checked it, stealing a glance at the screen. Her mouth tightened. The narrator who looked without sympathy saw something else, A feed of messages, a few supportive comments praising vigilance, a saved screenshot from another incident praising her quick action. The close narrator felt the unease that comes from someone whose value rests partly on being seen as heroic. Naomi, watching carefully, caught the edge of a smile that didn't reach Claire's eyes and felt a cold prickle. "You said you were watching," Claire insisted. "People say they feel uncomfortable when someone stares." Naomi's hands trembled in her lap. "I was nervous. I promise. I have an interview. It's everything." "Everything isn't a license to loiter by a gate," Claire said. The word loitered like a verdict. Around them, curiosity hardened into opinion. In the small quiet between questions, Naomi listened to how each person filled the silence with their own story. David wanted to be the neighbor who helped. Claire wanted to be the worker who saved the day. Evelyn wanted to be the one who made the right call. Mark wanted to finish his task. Naomi wanted one thing: to get on a plane. But the narrator who watched impartially noticed that people rarely move only for the simple reasons they give. The slighting of Naomi's explanation had already tilted into something else: performance, protection of image, the pull of social proof. Naomi felt those forces like an undertow. She realized then that the conflict wasn't just about a misunderstanding at a gate. It was about how small acts amplify and how strangers make meaning out of a single look. She pressed her thumb to the folded note in her pocket until the paper softened under her skin and tried to find steadiness in the middle of a ring of eyes. The scene closed on questions. Who would speak for her when the room wanted proof, and is kindness in a crowd more than a trend? The seeds of tension had been planted. Some would water them with care, others with something far colder. Naomi felt the world tilt again, but this time it was a colder, more deliberate motion. Claire had moved to the edge of the alcove to speak quietly into her phone, the kind of quiet that makes loud things happen. Naomi watched the shape of Claire's mouth, the practiced curl of someone used to being obeyed. The small, tender narrator noticed Naomi's fingers unconsciously reaching for the folded note in her pocket, an old, familiar talisman. The impartial observer recorded the moment. Claire's phone slid from her hand, skittered across the bench, and came to rest face up on the vinyl floor. For a single bright second, Naomi thought to pick it up and hand it back. Instead, she did what training in fear had taught her. She looked away. In that second, a child squealed nearby, and a barista shouted an order. The crowd's noise swallowed small things, but the phone's screen glowed, visible to anyone who leaned close. David, still standing by with the duffel, bent, his hand hovering. He did not pick it up immediately. A spectator's hesitation, Naomi thought, then the man stooped and, with a small motion as if fishing out a dropped coin, picked the phone up and held it so the screen faced Naomi for the briefest moment. The image burned into Naomi's chest, a group chat window, the title at the top of shorthand she could not immediately read, and beneath it a photograph, Naomi's own passport-style face frozen in the gate's light. Under the image, a line of text, Gate 16, a possible watcher. Flag. The blue bubbles of replies rolled with a casual cruelty. Yes, post it. Got it. Claire's on it. Clip when she reacts. Viral. The intimate narrator, the one that sits at the shoulder like a warm hand, wanted to explain that Naomi hadn't been staring in a predatory way. She had been nervous, visualizing questions, folding futures in her head. The impartial observer, cold-eyed and precise, could only list the facts. Naomi's photo in a chat, people praising the plan, Claire as the linchpin. What felt like a slow-motion betrayal snapped into a clean, lethal clarity. This was not random suspicion. It was a performance. Naomi's mouth went dry. She could hear the way her own blood moved in her ears. The room contracted to the small square of light on Claire's phone and the faces around it. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed, a quick flash of calculation that no uniform could hide. For the first time, Claire's mask slipped, the polished pride, the performative righteousness. She was an actor in a show that rewarded being right instead of being fair. Who? Naomi started, but the word died on her lips. David's expression changed in a way that was hard to read. A tightening at the jaw, a flicker of something that could have been regret. He shifted the phone out of view as if to protect Naomi or to hide what he had seen. Mark's hand, which had been writing, paused mid-sentence. Evelyn, the businesswoman, folded her phone closed with a small snap and stepped back, her face a mirror of composure that might have been guilt. The dual narrators pushed and pulled. The tender voice wanted to demand that someone speak up to make the crowd remember humanity. The impartial voice lined up the mechanics. A group had been tagging targets, people chosen for being slightly different, slightly visible, slightly inconvenient to the comfortable flow of travel. They created moments and then documented them, generating a loop: accusation, spectacle, validation. Naomi realized that the ring of eyes around her was not only curious, it had been primed. Claire's mouth moved toward Naomi as if to speak, but instead she spoke into the phone again, a soft, rehearsed voice. "I'll handle it. You were right to flag her." The words were mercenary. Naomi felt a small, hot flare of anger that sharpened into something colder, hurt folding into a new, fierce clarity. This was betrayal the size of a public square. It was not only that Claire had accused her, it was that Claire had planned the accusation as entertainment and proof of worth. Someone in the crowd cleared their throat. A woman, older than the rest, with tired, honest eyes, stepped forward. "Is that your phone?" she asked Naomi gently, indicating the image. Naomi swallowed. Her knees felt weak, but she straightened. She could have taken that moment to fight, to demand the phone be shown to security as evidence of orchestration. She could have asked Mark to read out the chat to show that she had been set up. The small, brave part of her, sharpened by years of choosing survival over spectacle, calculated the risks. A fight could explode into headlines, viral clips, a smear that would chase her to the scholarship interview. The public, once set on a narrative, is hard to make look back. The intimate narrator said, "Be loud." The impartial voice cautioned, "Be smart." Naomi felt both voices like two ropes tugging. She touched her mother's note in her pocket and felt how paper, so small and human, could anchor a choice. She did not want to be another clip in someone's feed, stripped of context to prove the busy that they were right. Before Naomi could decide, Claire recovered her phone, palms it like a prop. Her smile was small and tight. "We'll sort this out," she said, and her voice carried the same performance as before. But now, it was coated in a translucent sheen. People murmured, their faces lit by the glow of their screens where a live stream might already be forming in someone's head. The betrayal revealed itself not as physical violence, but as a structure, a network that turned suspicion into content and content into capital. It was colder because it involved many hands. The woman who whispered into her phone, the onlooker who did not intervene, the man who held the device up long enough for Naomi to see herself framed as other. Naomi's small private life, her notes, the bus rides, the interview, was suddenly vulnerable to becoming a spectacle that could follow her beyond the gate. In the quiet that followed, Naomi felt the world rearrange. It was no longer enough to be right. She would now have to decide how to be seen on her own terms or refuse to be seen at all. The first twist had stripped away the illusion that this was a simple misunderstanding. It was intentional. The stakes were not only about getting on a plane, they were about who controlled the story that would be told about her. Naomi felt the room tilt in a way she had not felt before, less like an accident and more like a slowly closing door. The intimate voice that had been at her shoulder since she arrived whispered that she should stand up, speak, and demand that the truth be told. It breathed courage. Say it loud, tell them it was a setup, make them see. But the impartial voice that kept an eye on facts and futures counted the cost. A viral clip could live forever. College committees looked people up. An angry crowd could change a story with one edit. The tug between those two voices made Naomi's chest ache. Mark asked Naomi to open her bag. The request was framed as routine, but it carried the weight of a new world, one where paper proof mattered less than the sway of an image. Naomi unzipped the backpack with fingers that were not steady. Her mother's note was the first thing she touched. She pressed it against her palm, letting the paper's thin warmth settle her like a charm. The small item had been her anchor. Now it felt like a private thing at risk of being read aloud in front of strangers. Any devices? Mark asked, professional and soft as a clinician. Naomi patted pockets, pulled out her phone, and handed it over. Her thumb left a faint oil mark on the screen, a small fingerprint that suddenly felt like a signature. David watched with the same expression he had held since the phone fell. Helpful, but cautious. Naomi read his face for a sign. Will he stand with me? And found only a careful neutrality. It hurt more than harshness might have. Claire hovered like a shadow that needed applause. She had the posture of someone who meant to be proved right. Her smile, when it came, was scaled for the ring of onlookers, and it made Naomi think of a stage where the person playing justice collects kudos. The intimate narrator felt a rush of anger, fierce and clean. The impartial voice noted Claire's quick messages, the way she checked for likes, as if they were a currency for valor. Naomi understood then that this was no longer only about her, it was also about who would get the reward for being vigilant. Security led Naomi to a small office with a narrow window that looked out over the gate, like an island lighthouse. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. Mark closed the door with a soft click of procedure. The air there was thick. We have to ask a few more questions, he said. Naomi answered as calmly as she could. Each sentence a careful stone thrown across a river she was not sure would hold. She told him about the scholarship, about the bus rides, about the single bulb over her mother's old table. The intimate narrator poured the small human things into the room, like water, hoping they might soak into someone's conscience. The impartial voice cataloged responses. Name, age, contact, appointment time, information that either cleared someone or slowly built a file. Outside the thin glass, the murmurs grew. Someone had started recording. The small, piercing sound of a camera shutter, cell phone chirps, was a drumbeat that kept time with Naomi's panic. She imagined clips stitched and shared. The part where she was asked to stand up the moment Claire pointed, the shot where her hands fumbled with the boarding pass. Each possible clip was a version of the truth, edited and trimmed, with context cut away. Naomi felt squeezed between minutes that could be cut into a narrative that was not hers. The choice that pressed hardest on Naomi was not just whether to fight the accusation, but how to protect a fragile future. If she argued loudly, she might clear her name at that moment, but risk the longer harm of public humiliation. If she remained quiet, she saved herself from spectacle, but gave other people the power to write the story. The intimate narrator urged her to refuse erasure. Tell the whole thing. Let observers meet the person behind the clip. The impartial voice measured consequences with a cold ruler and suggested silence as strategy. Naomi sat with both ropes wrapped around her heart, feeling them pull. David's hands found Naomi's in a moment that was both surprising and tentative. He did not show a full hero's certainty. His fingers were quick, the touch minimal, like someone testing the temperature of water before jumping in. They can't just, he started and then stopped, as if realizing a statement could become part of a future report. The mixed narrator noted his hesitation. He wanted to help, but feared the cost. Naomi clung to that small connection because it was human and fragile and real. Evelyn's eyes kept skimming the room, her phone never far. She leaned against a pillar, with a practiced aloofness that felt like a shield. In the small, private ledger of the impartial observer, Evelyn's type was a signal, someone who valued order and the validation of being right. Naomi watched her and saw how easy it was for onlookers to substitute comfort for courage. The crowd's appetite for a neat story had already begun to swallow the messy, complicated truth. When Mark checked the travel times and then his watch, Naomi felt the second hand cut the air like a blade. If the plane was delayed for security, her interview might be rescheduled. If she was held longer, the university might assume she did not show. The stakes were practical and intimate. Money, reputation, a chance for a different life. Naomi's heart moved from panic into calculation. The intimate voice lent her courage in small doses. Speak to the airline supervisor, ask for a written note explaining the delay, and contact the scholarship coordinator. The impartial voice suggested a record. Ask Mark for his badge number, record the names of witnesses, keep her answers precise. As questions continued, Naomi felt the weight of the room shift from curiosity to judgment to a kind of weary entertainment. She realized that the true challenge was not only external, the scrutiny, the recordings, the messages, but internal, to decide which version of herself she would protect, which truths she would keep, and which she would sacrifice to the altar of survival. The plane would not move until someone made a call. Her life might hang on the dial tone of someone else's decision. She folded her hands on her lap and breathed, letting the slow inhale be an act of reclamation. The thin door clicked open, and the small office that had felt like a cage suddenly felt like a stage where everything could be heard. Naomi's chest had the steady, tight beat of someone who had decided at last to act. She had three things in her hands: her mother's folded note, the edge of her boarding pass, and her phone, which felt both dangerous and like a lifeline. The intimate voice at her shoulder whispered in plain language, "Call him." The impartial voice counted risks, but could not stop the courage that had begun to rise. She dialed the number she had been given for the scholarship interview coordinator, Professor Alan Reed, because she needed a witness and because the world sometimes makes unlikely intersections. The line clicked, and a patient voice answered, "Hello, this is Alan." His voice was warm and calm, like a hand on a shoulder. Naomi spoke fast, words tumbling with fear and hope. She told him who she was, where she was, the way Claire had singled her out, about the chat on a phone that had flashed her face like prey. There was a pause on the line that felt like another person bracing himself. "Stay where you are," Alan said slowly. "I'm on a flight that's taxiing right now. I'm on flight 227 in row 12. I'll speak to the captain. Don't say another thing to anyone else." The calm in his voice steadied Naomi like a strap. Outside the small office, the glass showed a handful of heads around gate 16 turning, the ring of attention widening as if to accommodate a new actor. Down the hall, a gate agent called the next boarding group, and voices hummed, but then they faltered as a lack of motion announced a new importance. In the control room, cables and policy and fearful humans intersected. An airline operations manager, when told there might be an on-ground incident involving a passenger who claimed targeted harassment and a possible staged social media trap, had the authority to hold a plane. Alan's calm was a lever. The narrator who watched closely, the one that loved small human truths, saw Naomi's thumb tremble against the paper in her pocket. She heard the small intake of breath as somewhere beyond the glass, someone reached for their phone to record the next moment. The impartial observer saw the policy. A complaint from a credible source, a passenger willing to vouch in real time, a possible social media setup, enough to flag a hold. The decision came by voice from elsewhere. Flight 227 would not leave the gate. Operations had grounded it pending a security check. The sound of the announcement was simple and ordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are working on a brief delay," but to Naomi it sounded like justice. Passengers shifted, mutters rose and fell, and Claire's face went the color of alarm under lipstick. She clutched her bag like someone losing a rehearsed line. Around her, the little crowd that had watched with the same appetite they felt for a show now found themselves in a quieter, sharper scene. The ring tightened with a new sound, whispers of, "Why? And what's happening?" David stepped forward then, the fatigue in his shoulders replaced by something like resolve. The man who had hovered with a duffel bag now held a phone in his hand. He had been one of those who glanced and filmed, who watched and waited for proof. For a breath, he had thought to stay distant, to preserve comfort. But there are moments when a bystander becomes a witness. He crossed into that place and set the phone on the table between Naomi and Mark. On the screen scrolled the group chat, messages praising Claire's vigilance, the photo of Naomi, the plan to clip and post. "Hi," David began, his voice ragged. He did not finish a rehearsed excuse. The intimate voice in the room felt his shame like a hand against heat. "I didn't want this to go so far," he said. "I thought it was just a joke to get clicks. I'm sorry." He handed the phone to Mark, who took it with a professional, unreadable face. The impartial observer logged the evidence as if a ledger had been filled. Names, timestamps, a plan exposed. Claire's face hardened into something brittle. She had been the linchpin, The person whose call to flag had turned a private moment into a public event. Now she searched for language that would hold. She found a version of duty. "We were following policy," she said, voice thin. "We reported suspicious behavior. If someone is watching, if someone is being watched by people who want to show," Naomi interrupted, and her voice, when it came, carried the steady force of someone who had been pressed long enough that the small things had to be said. She described the note in her pocket, the bus rides, the interview. She described a life that did not fit into a thumbnail clip. Her words were precise, honest, and human. Alan's voice came over the line again, now talking to a person at gate operations. He was calm but firm. He said he would speak to the captain, that he had a student on site who was being wronged, that he wanted to accompany her to make sure she could get to her interview. Pilots respect safety and chain of command. Operations respect the chain. The plane would remain until operations cleared the scene and ensured there was no real threat. Grounded for now. The announcement echoed again, and the hubbub quieted into a murmur. With the plane held, the crowd's energy shifted. People who had been tempted by spectacle now felt the embarrassment of having watched. A few offered quiet apologies. A few simply slid away, faces tight. Evelyn, the woman in the business suit, folded her phone like someone closing a ledger she did not want to read. Mark read the chat aloud, each message landing in the room like a pebble. The plan had been trivialized online. Go viral, clips for fun, but here in fluorescent light and tired chairs, it looked mean and small and deliberate. Claire's composure cracked. The impartial narrator measured the fall, reputation frayed, a job possibly at risk. The intimate narrator lingered on the expression flaring across her face, shame, then a quick, hard glance toward Naomi, as if searching for absolution that would not come. Claire began, then stopped. The room was not a stage for her alone anymore. What followed was not a neat courtroom of guilt and punishment. Mark filed a report. Operations took statements. Alan waited in the gate area, a steady presence. His kindness was practical and fierce. Naomi felt the lift and drag of relief that the plane would not simply leave a lie in its wake, and a bruise from the knowledge that even this moment of clarity had been carved out of pain. As people dispersed, some murmuring apologies and others angry at the delay, Naomi sat for a long beat and let herself exhale. The intimate voice sat with her and said softly, "You called someone who listened." The impartial voice tallied what had changed. A plane held, a chat exposed, a performer unmasked. The betrayal had been revealed and part of it undone. But the scars of being framed would not vanish with an announcement. Naomi's future had been saved from one immediate clip, but the greater work, reclaiming her story in public, in the application process, in the long quiet of her mother's kitchen, had just begun. In that place between the small victory and the long work ahead, Naomi folded the note from her mother, feeling the faint crinkle of ink. She had been seen imperfectly and finally, and she had answered the most difficult question. When the world tried to write you small, would you speak back? The plane stayed grounded for a while longer, a metal beast held by human choice, and Naomi's breath came easier as she rose to face what would come next. Naomi left the little office with her hands empty of proof but full of a new, strange weight. The plane was still grounded, but the urgency in the room had changed shape. People no longer watched as if waiting for a show. They watched as if they had been caught watching themselves. Claire sat to the side, face pale and tight, while Mark filled out his report with the kind of slow, careful attention that makes paperwork feel like a verdict. David hovered near, his posture smaller than before, the phone tucked away like a thing you hide when it stings. The close voice that had held Naomi's small fears all morning leaned in and said, softly, the thing she already knew. Being seen is not the same as being known. The impartial voice, neat and clear, added, the mechanisms that made this happen will remain unless someone changes them. Those two truths sat together in Naomi like a pair of uneven stones, both heavy, both necessary. Alan Reed met her at the gate with calm eyes and an umbrella of steadiness. I'm sorry, he said without ceremony, meaning the practical sort. Sorry this happened. Sorry you were put through it. He handed her a small card with a time and a name. He had arranged for a brief video interview with the scholarship panel that evening if the plane didn't move. If it did, he'd make sure they knew. That small action, voice to captain, word to committee, felt like a lever that could move a stubborn thing. Naomi remembered the line from her mother's note and laughed without sound. Be brave. Come home a little richer for your dreams. The paper had not changed the facts, but it steadied the trembling in her hands. She thought of the kitchen table, waiting at home, of a light switched on for her return. She thought of small mercies. A call that mattered, a teacher who chose to act, a security officer who read the chat aloud and could not unhear his own role. Those mercies were not the same as justice, but they were beginning places. Outside the gate, the airport released people into a day that would remember and forget in the same breath. Some travelers apologized softly to Naomi as they passed. Others turned away with their earbuds in, the world filtered. Claire remained behind when passengers left. She spoke to Mark in low tones, her hands moving like someone practicing an apology that does not yet fit. Mark's voice was procedural. We'll include everything in the report, he said. We'll forward it to operations. They'll decide. Naomi could have demanded more, an on-record apology, a public retraction. Claire fired a statement placed in the airline's feed. The intimate voice urged that righteous path, make them see how wrong it felt. The impartial voice weighed risk and consequence. A public fight might become another clip, another piece of the spectacle. She stood with both tensions tightening like bows. In the end, she chose something quieter and harder. She asked Mark for a copy of the report and Alan to write a brief note outlining what he had heard. She asked Claire once to meet her in a calm room and speak, not for the crowd, but so she could hear words that had not been written on a screen. Claire's apology was not immediate. It came in fits, an explanation that sounded like a defense, then a crack of shame, then a thin, I'm sorry that kept trying to find its shape. Naomi listened. She did not accept or deny forgiveness in moment. She simply collected the facts and the words, folded them into file folders like small, heavy things to be kept. At the end of the day, Naomi sat in a corner of the gate area with Alan on a phone video, answering questions that were meant to measure her future. She spoke with a voice steadier than she felt, using the small honesty she had practiced. About bus rides and study nights, about the note in her pocket, and the way her hands folded paper when she was nervous. The panel listened. They asked one question she did not expect. How do you respond when people try to define you? And Naomi, surprised at her own answer, said, I tell the truth, and then I try to make something better out of it. That night, before she slept in a cheap room Alan had helped find, Naomi thought not about the likes or the clips, but about what it would mean to reclaim a story. The moral weight of the morning sat in her chest like a stone that did not want to be thrown away. She thought of the crowd who had watched, of David who had turned witness, and of Claire who had sought validation in the click. She forgave nothing quickly. Forgiveness is not a bandage you apply and walk away from. She let herself feel anger, and then let that anger shape into a plan. She would not let the morning be the final word. Naomi made a list, 3 items, small and fierce. First, she would email the scholarship committee the report and Alan's note, so the record existed beyond a thumbnail. Second, she would ask the airline for a formal statement and push for staff training about profiles and social media. Third, she would speak if someone asked in school or community groups about what had happened. Not to make a spectacle, she decided, but to change the way people look at one another when a phone is in hand. The intimate narrator sat with her through those choices and said, quietly, that courage is not always loud. The impartial observer nodded. Systems are changed by the patient work of documentation and insistence. Naomi slept a fitful sleep and woke with the same small fire she had at the airport. Not revenge, not performative triumph, but an insistence that her life could not be clipped and sold. Weeks later, when the scholarship letter arrived, an acceptance that would pay for books and a room and the permission to be something more, Naomi folded it into the same pocket where her mother's note lived. The victory did not erase the morning. It reframed it. She had been framed and then chosen to frame herself back. In the end, she learned something complicated and ordinary. People will sometimes choose spectacle over mercy, and that choice will leave marks. But people will sometimes, in the thin pauses between clicks, step forward. The moral of the morning was not a neat sentence. It was an ongoing work to insist that stories belong to the people who live them and to teach the watching hands to do better. Naomi kept the note from her mother folded close, and when she thought about Claire later, she thought of two things: accountability and the slow possibility that someone who has been wrong can learn to stop looking for applause and start looking for what is right. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.